Hello my lovely witches, welcome back to my little channel. Today's video is, as you probably can tell from the title because you're clever like that, about supplies or materials that I use in my books. I get a lot of questions about what I use in my books, and so I thought I would answer them rather than just replying to individual comments. I thought I might as well just do a whole video and show you some things that I use. So one of the main questions I get is what I use on the backgrounds of my pages, and it varies. So for example, this here, something like this is just watercolor. So straightforward paint box filled with watercolors. Now I have, it's a bit damp, I've obviously been using it. I have a lot of watercolors, so I have a lot of different palettes for each sort of color theme. This is my pinks, reds and oranges. I have probably 5 or 6 of these, plus a few other palettes as well. So I'm a little bit of a watercolor addict, I guess. But you don't have to have as many as I do. A standard set of 24 watercolors will do pretty much everything you need it to do. Yes, there are fancy metallic ones and that sort of thing that you can also get, but start out with a basic set. I will say though, the very, very cheap watercolor sets aren't ideal. And that is because they tend to be quite low pigment, and therefore when they dry they're very chalky, which actually makes it hard to write over. Pens clog up with the chalkiness of the finish. So do spend just that little bit more on your watercolors. You don't have to go super professional grade watercolor. I like Art Philosophy. They're quite reasonably priced. I also use quite a lot of Winsor & Newton, and I like some Daniel Smith, but they're a bit pricier for us here in Australia. So just spending that little bit more will be a lot more helpful if you're wanting to use watercolor as a background to write over. So that's basic watercolor, but I also have used, and I'll find, here's a page that I've used them on, a watercolor texter, essentially, a watercolor marker. I use these Ecoline brush pens. I also have the ink for these. They call them a liquid watercolor that come in the little bottles, and you can actually use them to refill the brush pens as well. But they are, you can put them over the paper and then reactivate them with a brush and water. And they are actually a dye-based product, so they don't require quite as much water. And I know that sometimes people find watercolors can be a bit messy. These can be a bit better, but you will find that they will sometimes stain through flimsy pages because they're dye-based. So they are quite strong in color, but you get really beautiful, vibrant colors with them. So again, highly recommend, and that's what I've used on a page like this one. The other alternative that I use for backgrounds, which I've actually used a bit of a combination here, some watercolor, but also some gouache, which is a water-based paint. It's very much like watercolor, but it's opaque, so it has the texture and the feel and work like a watercolor on the brush, but it has more of an acrylic effect in the background, but it's not going to make your pages sticky, which is a big problem when working with paints, particularly acrylic paint in books, which I know I've spoken about that before, but I just thought I'd show you that these are some of the gouache paints that I use. I've also used these guys, which are an acrylic gouache. So, I mean, they call them gouache. They're not really. They're really an acrylic paint that's very matte. I don't mind these. They at least don't, like, these will reactivate if you go over them with another wet media. So you need to be aware of that. But then so can watercolor sometimes. I think gouache does it more. The acrylic gouache doesn't do that, which is handy. But if I'm going to use an acrylic product in my book, I actually find the craft acrylics that are matte much better. These are Arteza brand, which I have a funny feeling is maybe even Amazon's own. I don't know. Guys, this is not a sponsored video. I don't have any affiliate links or anything like that. No affiliations. I'm not being paid for discussing these products. All I'm doing is coming to you with the things that I use in my books because I get asked lots of questions about it. There are many different brands of craft paints out there. I happen to have these. I happen to like the matteness of them. I've used other matte acrylic paints and not found them as matte. I know that I'm using the word matte a lot, but they're just not as matte. You get a bit more of that stickiness, whereas I find these are, generally speaking, pretty good with not being too sticky. So I'm just going to see if I can flick to a page where I've used them. Here is a page where I've used them. And you can, you know, I can feel it. I don't know how well you can see that they're not sticky, but you can certainly see that they don't stick together, which is awesome. And I've used them on this page as well. So nice and matte, and don't stick your pages together. Having said that, if you do want to use an acrylic paint in your book, such as I have used in here, that isn't a matte acrylic, I highly, highly, highly recommend that you use a product like this one. This is a just a matte acrylic spray. I find this has been the best brand that I've been able to find. I've tried others. I've tried other things in the Krylon range. When I couldn't get this one, they do one for protecting photographs specifically with a matte finish. I much prefer this one. This one dries really, really quickly so that you can spray it over your page in your book, and then you don't have to leave it sitting open for 24 hours for it to dry. Whereas the one that I used, that's also made by Krylon, which worked quite effectively for the one that they make for photographs, it takes 24 hours to dry and it's just a nightmare. Whereas this one, literally 10 minutes and your page is dry and you can shut your book and it will no longer stick together. So that's my favorite product for going over pages in my book. I also, for a matte finish, quite like these Distress Oxide sprays, so that you can give yourself a bit of a spray finish. Now, they again do reactivate with water, but if you use this over the top of them, then it will all stay very, very matte and won't lift up if you're putting, for example, glue down on them to glue something down, or you want to paint over the top. So love these again for their matte. They've got a kind of a chalky matte finish that's quite nice. And you can, in fact, sort of pour a little bit out onto a palette and use it more like a paint if you want to. I quite like doing, some spray sort of finish. And probably the other thing that I like to use, I've been asked before how I get these pages in this reclaimed book so that you can still see the words on the page. And in this instance, for a lot of these pages, what I've actually used is spray paint. Spray paint is an underrated art material for using in more unusual ways. Like, it's actually really good on paper. I love it on paper. Now, you can see I've got a couple of different brands here. This is just a very, very cheap brand that you can find in most hardware stores and even, you know, your sort of $2 shop type places. Obviously, this is an Australian brand, so anyone overseas, you wouldn't be able to find it, but I'm not really recommending it for the brand, but purely because it's spray paint. And what I'm saying is you can use any brand at all. It doesn't really matter. I love the effect of Rust-Oleum. I like this brand. However, I like the fact that it comes in matte, satin, and gloss. You can get different types. But when you're only spraying a small amount over paper, it actually doesn't matter what finish it is. The one thing I don't like about Rust-Oleum, and this has got a lot left in it. You can probably hear that, but it is completely useless to me now. Why, you ask? Because the nozzle is totally clogged. And that's what I find. This is a type of spray can that allows you to paint from any direction, which if you're spray painting a piece of furniture, that's freaking awesome. That's great. But the only way that I know of to clear a nozzle of spray paint is to turn my spray can upside down and spray until it goes clear and no paint comes out. You can do that with a standard spray can like this. You can't do it with these because of this spray in any direction situation, because it's just going to come out upside down. So highly recommend the actual finish of the paint, but the delivery method can cause you problems. I'm not saying it's necessarily always going to, and I always try and wipe the nozzle and all that sort of stuff. I've got little nozzle brushes, but at the end of the day, I've had so many of these clog up on me and it does my head in. Anyway, maybe Rust-Oleum will listen to me and create some other method of doing their paints. I doubt it. I don't think the people at Rust-Oleum are busy watching videos on art witching and books. Anyway, I hope that has given you a little bit of a insight into the products that I use. Here's one that's been spray painted. And this is watercolor, and gives you some ideas of things you can use in your own books or art projects or whatever. Have fun creating, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye, my lovely witches.